When a ruthless gang of outlaws targets a quiet family farm, they think it'll be an easy score. Until they cross paths with Sarah Johnson, a former Green Beret sniper with a deadly past. Now, the hunters have become the hunted. Subscribe to the channel and follow along to see how this powerful story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun dipped low over the sprawling fields of the Midwest, casting a golden hue over the Johnson family farm. For generations, the Johnsons had tilled the land, their roots as deep as the cornstalks that swayed in the breeze. But tonight, the tranquility of the farm would be shattered. Sarah Johnson, the youngest of the Johnson clan, stood on the porch, her sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon. At 28, she had returned home after a decade of service in the military. To her family, she was just Sarah, the farmer's daughter who had gone off to serve her country. But beneath her unassuming demeanor lay a lethal secret. Sarah was a former Green Beret sniper, trained to eliminate threats with precision and stealth. As the sun disappeared, a convoy of black SUVs rolled down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She recognized the vehicles. They belonged to the Black Talons, a notorious outlaw gang that had been terrorizing the region. The gang had recently expanded their operations, stealing crops, livestock, and even land from local farmers. The Johnsons had refused to bow to their demands, and now, it seemed, the Black Talons had come to collect. The SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the farmhouse. 6 men, armed to the teeth, stepped out. Their leader, a hulking figure named Jeb Rattlesnake Malone, sauntered up to the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel. He wore a sneer that could curdle milk and a voice that dripped with menace. "Evenin', folks," Jeb drawled, tipping his hat mockingly. "We're here to discuss a little business. Y'all have been mighty uncooperative, and we don't take kindly to that." Sarah's father, Tom Johnson, stepped forward, his weathered face set in a grim expression. "We've got nothing to say to you, Malone. This is our land, and we ain't giving it up." Jeb chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "Well, that's too bad, 'cause if you don't hand over the deed by sunrise, there's gonna be trouble. And trust me, you don't want that." Sarah, who had been silently observing from the shadows, stepped into the light. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge that made the outlaws pause. "You've got 10 seconds to get off our property." Jeb's eyes narrowed as he took in the petite woman before him. Well, well, what do we have here? The farmer's daughter, all grown up. "You gonna make me, sweetheart?" Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she reached behind her back and pulled out a hunting knife, its blade glinting in the fading light. The outlaws laughed, but their amusement was short-lived. In a blur of motion, Sarah lunged forward, disarming the nearest outlaw with a swift strike to his wrist. Before he could react, she spun around and delivered a crushing blow to his temple, sending him sprawling to the ground. The other outlaws froze, stunned by the sudden display of violence. Jeb's sneer turned into a snarl. "You're gonna regret that, girl." Sarah's eyes locked onto his, cold and unyielding. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The outlaws opened fire, but Sarah was already moving. She dove behind a wooden barrel, her mind racing. She needed a plan. The farmhouse was too exposed, and her family was inside. She couldn't let the outlaws get to them. As bullets whizzed past, Sarah's training took over. She remembered her days in the Green Berets, the countless hours spent honing her skills. She was a sniper, a ghost in the shadows, and tonight, she would become the predator. The barn was a sanctuary of shadows, its wooden beams creaking softly in the night as Sarah Johnson slipped inside. The air was thick with the scent of hay and earth, a familiar comfort that grounded her as she moved with the precision of a predator. Her heart beat steadily, her breathing calm and controlled. This was her domain now, and she was about to remind the outlaws why they should never have crossed her. Sarah's boots made no sound as she climbed the ladder to the hayloft, her movements fluid and deliberate. She had spent countless hours in this barn as a child, playing hide-and-seek with her siblings, but tonight, it was no game. The hayloft was her vantage point, her sniper's nest. Hidden among the bales of hay was her old military-issue rifle, a Remington M24, meticulously maintained and ready for action. She had kept it hidden from her family, a relic of her past life that she had hoped to leave behind. But now, it was her only hope. As she retrieved the rifle, her fingers traced the familiar contours of the weapon. It felt like an extension of her body, a tool she had mastered through years of grueling training and combat. She loaded it with practiced ease, the metallic click of the bolt sliding home echoing softly in the quiet barn. Peering through the scope, she scanned the scene outside. The outlaws were still gathered near the farmhouse, their voices carrying on the night air. Jeb Malone, their leader, was barking orders, his tone laced with frustration and rage. The men were visibly shaken, their bravado crumbling after Sarah's sudden and brutal attack. They had expected an easy target, a defenseless farmer's family. Instead, they had stumbled into a hornet's nest, and the queen was about to strike. Sarah's mind was a battlefield of strategy and instinct. She knew she was outnumbered, but she also knew she had the advantage of surprise and skill. The outlaws were thugs, used to bullying unarmed civilians. They had no idea they were facing a former Green Beret sniper, a woman who had survived some of the most hostile environments on Earth and emerged stronger for it. Sarah's training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly even when the odds were against her. And now, she would use every ounce of that training to protect her family. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she lined up her first shot. The scope's crosshairs settled on an outlaw who was pacing near the SUVs, his rifle slung carelessly over his shoulder. He was the closest threat, and eliminating him would send a clear message to the others. Sarah's finger hovered over the trigger, her focus absolute. The world seemed to narrow to just her, the rifle, and her target. The crack of the rifle shot shattered the night, its echo rolling across the fields like thunder. The outlaw crumpled to the ground, a bullet through his skull. For a split second, there was silence, a collective intake of breath as the remaining outlaws processed what had just happened. Then chaos erupted. "Sniper!" one of the men shouted, his voice tinged with panic. The outlaws scrambled for cover, diving behind the SUVs and whatever other obstacles they could find. Jeb Malone's voice rose above the din, a mixture of rage and desperation as he tried to rally his men. "Find her!" he roared. "She's just one woman! Take her down!" But Sarah was already on the move. She knew that staying in one spot would make her an easy target, so she repositioned herself, crawling silently to a new vantage point. The hayloft offered multiple angles of fire, and she intended to use every one of them. Her movements were deliberate, her body low to the ground as she avoided detection. She was a ghost, a shadow in the night, and the outlaws had no idea where she was. From her new position, Sarah lined up her next shot. This time, her target was a man crouched behind one of the SUVs, his head just visible above the hood. He was scanning the barn, his rifle at the ready, but he never saw her coming. Another shot rang out, and he fell, his body slumping to the ground. The outlaws were in disarray now, their confidence shattered. They fired blindly in the direction of the barn, their shots wild and unfocused. Bullets tore through the wooden walls, splintering the wood and sending shards flying, but Sarah remained unharmed. She was too well hidden, too disciplined to give away her position. Jeb Malone was furious, his face twisted in a snarl as he shouted at his men. "Stop wasting ammo! She's in the barn! Flank her!" Two of the outlaws broke away from the group, moving cautiously toward the barn. Sarah watched them through her scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. She waited until they were within range, then took them down with two quick shots. The first man fell instantly, a bullet to the chest. The second managed to fire off a wild shot before Sarah's bullet found its mark, dropping him where he stood. The remaining outlaws were paralyzed with fear. They had come to the farm expecting an easy victory, but instead, they were being picked off one by an unseen enemy. Jeb Malone was the only one who seemed undeterred, his rage driving him forward. He grabbed a shotgun from one of his fallen men and charged toward the barn, firing wildly as he ran. Sarah saw him coming and knew she had to act fast. Jeb was a dangerous man, driven by a combination of anger and desperation. If he reached the barn, he would tear it apart to find her. She couldn't let that happen. She took a deep breath, steadying her aim as Jeb closed the distance. He was a moving target, but Sarah had trained for this. She adjusted for his speed and trajectory, her finger tightening on the trigger. The shot rang out, and Jeb stumbled, a bullet tearing through his shoulder. He roared in pain, but kept coming, his eyes wild with fury. Sarah fired again, this time hitting him in the leg. Jeb fell to the ground, his shotgun slipping from his grasp. He tried to crawl toward the barn, but Sarah was already descending from the hayloft, her rifle trained on him. As she stepped out of the barn, the remaining outlaws turned and fled, their courage completely shattered. They left their fallen comrades behind, scrambling into the SUVs and speeding away into the night. Sarah didn't bother to pursue them. They were no longer a threat. She approached Jeb Malone, her rifle still aimed at him. He looked up at her, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. Who are you?" he gasped. Sarah's voice was cold and steady. "I'm the farmer's daughter, and you made the mistake of coming after my family." With that, she fired one last shot, ending Jeb Malone's reign of terror, once and for all. The farm was silent again, the only sound the distant rumble of the fleeing SUVs. Sarah lowered her rifle, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the fight. She had done it. She had protected her family. But as she looked out at the carnage, she knew that this was only the beginning. The Black Talons were gone, but there would always be more threats, more enemies. And Sarah Johnson, the farmer's daughter and former Green Beret sniper, would always be ready to face them. Part 5. The Aftermath. Sarah emerged from the barn, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Her family rushed out of the farmhouse, their faces a mix of relief and awe. Tom Johnson pulled his daughter into a tight embrace, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't know, Sarah. I didn't know what you were capable of." Sarah smiled softly, the first sign of warmth she had shown all night. "I did what I had to do, Dad, to protect our home." As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the Johnson family stood together, united and unbroken. The Black Talons were no more, and the farm was safe. But Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. The world was full of threats, and she would always be ready to defend what she loved. For Sarah Johnson was more than just a farmer's daughter. She was a warrior, a protector, and a force to be reckoned with. And anyone who dared to cross her would learn the hard way. Never underestimate a Green Beret sniper.